I'm going to call to order the Joint Policy and Technical Committee meeting. It's Monday, December 8th, it's 1:30 p.m. I'd like to go through and announce, well, actually, I guess I can do self-introductions. I'd like to have the TAC introduce themselves, please. Start at that end of the room. Whoever's the furthest down on that table, it's you.
I'm Marge Stone-Canton. I'm the Technical Advisory Committee as the Air Quality Representative.
Thank you.
Jerry Hansen, Project Management Engineering.
Max Wilbur, the Director of Public Transportation.
Jennifer Witt, Central Region DOT, Chief of Planning.
Brian Lindenwood, Alaska Railroad.
Pete Peterson, Assembly.
Tim Steele, Assembly and AMATS.
Dan Sullivan, Mayor.
Rob Campbell, Chair.
Cindy Heil, Department of Environmental Conservation Air Quality.
Sharon Walsh, Deputy Director, Port of Anchorage.
Ken Morton, DOT Reconstruction Engineer.
Jerry Weaver, Director of Community Development.
Thank you. Okay, we've got a special meeting here today. We're going to talk about Connect Arm Crossing is going to present some of their traffic numbers to us here. I guess I'd like to lay out how I think the meeting should go forward, and unless I'm swarmed under by the crowd here, this is what we'll do. We're going to let the team present their information first. I'd like to do that with no interruptions. We will then start with the policy committee, and I'll give the policy committee each 2 to 3 minutes to ask questions interactively of the team as they see fit. You get one turn and one turn only. No cutting back in line. We'll do the same thing then with the technical committee. We'll allow the technical committee members a minute or two each to ask questions. And then we'll have comments. I don't think it's going to be appropriate for the crowd, such as it is, to engage in a debate with this thing. So what we'll do is take public comment from the public that wants to make comments at the end of the meeting for the last, and you'll get 2 to 3 minutes each for that, depending on how many people want to make comments. And we'll, of course, record those comments, and they'll be part of the record. And so if you do have questions contained in your comments, the team can get back to those either electronically or to you in person. You can leave your name and address here as part of the record. So that's how I want to try to keep this thing rolling along and keep it organized. So with that, I will present, well, let me make a couple other comments first. This is not a decision-making meeting here, so we're not going to come to any conclusions at the end of this meeting. There's not going to be a vote on anything. There's no kind of policy direction being set here. This is just an informational meeting. So I would expect the tenor to be respectful and appropriate during the meeting. I don't think there's any reason to get emotional or wound up here. It's just some traffic numbers, okay? So let's keep that in mind. I think with that, I will then turn it over to the Director of Connect Arm Crossing, Judy Doherty, to introduce her team and give us a little background about the project and kind of where they're at and where they're headed in the near future.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, I'm Judy Doherty. I'm the Director for Connect Arm Crossing for DOT. I also serve as the Executive Director to Cabata. You may or may not know that Cabata still exists and will take over after the bridge is built and collect the toll. I have with me Bill Reed and Shanna Zustan with Cardno and Agnew-Beck respectively. Cardno is the lead in our socioeconomic study and Agnew-Beck was the sub to that contract. I also have Hugh Miller, who's with CDM Smith, and Megan, who's with here for support with Agnew-Beck. Rob mentioned public comment. I'd like to let you all know that these slide presentations will be available on our website. We worked them over a little bit this morning. They'll be up there probably this afternoon. They're probably getting posted right now. You can also, if you don't have opportunity to comment or don't think about what you might want to say, you're welcome to, send us an email at connectarmbridge.com and we'll collect your comments that way as well. So why are we here? Back in the fall of 2013, Cabata and AMATS entered into an agreement to share data with respect to developing these traffic models. We had requested the AMATS model so that we could update our model. And then in July, the project switched over from Cabata to DOT, and so the agreement came with it, and so we're here to show you what we've learned. Next slide. So back in the spring of 2013, there was a legislative audit that brought a few things into question with respect to our traffic model and our socioeconomics. So socioeconomic study was old. It predated the 2008 recession. It was dated in 2007. And so we decided to launch a new traffic and revenue update and do a new socioeconomic study. That effort was scoped to support the public-private partnership effort that we were working to get through the legislature at that time. We had CDM Smith on board to do our traffic modeling, and we brought Cardinal and Agnew back on in July to do the new socioeconomic study. Then in December, the state decided to adopt a public financing plan for the project. Switching from a private finance to public finance required doing a number of additional studies. We needed to have the whole effort be much more robust in order to support the TIFIA element of the financing plan. So that's the main purpose of the work that we're doing here. It's to support DOT in attaining that TIFIA loan and delivering that financing plan for the project. So I want to thank everybody here for sharing that AMATS data with us. It saved us a lot of time, it saved us a lot of money, and we hope that the data that we are reciprocating with does the same for you and gives you some benefit. So I've got that data right here. I'm not sure who to give it to. There you go. So I'll turn it over to Shanna and Bill. They're going to talk about the socioeconomic study, and then Hugh will take over to talk about the traffic results.
All right, I think I'll stand over here so I can see everybody. Again, my name is Shanna Zustan. I work for Agnew Beck Consulting. We're a local land planning and consulting firm here in Anchorage. And we've been a subcontractor to Bill Reed through Cardno for the last 18 months on this project. Our sort of division of labor and roles has been that Agnew Beck has been responsible for really the base year analysis, getting everything up to the 2012 base year and current in terms of the socioeconomic inputs. And then Bill's really the lead economist who's been driving the overall forecast as well as the allocation of that forecast to the smaller areas. So again, Judy reiterated this, but the purpose of a study is really to develop socioeconomic data as inputs into a traffic model to forecast traffic and toll revenue for the Kindergarten crossing. The steps we used were to really look at past studies and understand what those forecasts showed, conduct a series of key informant interviews as well, get the base year in working order, and the base year is 2012, and then really build a forecast model that is really at 4 scenarios: a build, which has a low, a mid or a base, and a high, as well as a no build, what would happen if there was no crossing. And then we review the results and refine them and make adjustments as necessary. Next slide, Bill. So I'm going to talk about the base year. So for the method for the base year, again, we looked at past studies and did a series of key informant interviews that I'll talk about in a second. We really established what we call 2012 control totals. So what are the aggregate employment and population numbers for that borough, for Anchorage, and for the MSA as a whole, the metropolitan statistical area. And then those control totals then get allocated out to what we call traffic analysis zones, or TAZs. And those are really small geographic areas that are used to model traffic counts in any particular region. And then we did a series of data verification and we refined those results. This is a list of the key informants and institutions that we talked with. There's a chapter in the report that really kind of goes through what people said. We did not structure these discussions as a pros and a cons about the project itself. It was really about what are the economic fundamentals which sort of drive the economy here in Anchorage, and how do we use that information to develop the most robust forecast we could. So we talked with the Anchorage Economic Development Corporation, Economic Development Department on the borough side, the Port of Anchorage, Port McKenzie, lead economist at Department of Labor. We talked with the Alaska Trucking Association quite a bit because we wanted to make sure we got the employment for trucking as close to correct as possible. So we talked with them about their process and how they use the transportation network. We talked to consultants and contractors who worked on previous studies like HDR, who worked on the EIS, as well as ICER, who's done a lot of the forecasting for this project and for many projects. So that really provided a basis for developing the right forecast and base year methodology. So for the first step, after the key informants, was the control totals, and this is just information that most people know. The Anchorage MSA, as of 2012, was home to about 392,000 people. 76% of the people live in Anchorage, while the remainder live in the borough. The MSA is home to about 190,000 jobs, defined by place of work, and this is important because as you look at other studies, folks have done things slightly different. Some have placed more emphasis on, what kind of jobs you have and recording that at your home. But for traffic modeling purposes, it's much more relevant to model the job where people go to work, so that you can kind of model that commute between your home and your place of work. And 89% of jobs are here in Anchorage right now. This is just a historical picture. You can see how, the borough has gone from about 40,000 people to 93,000 in 2012. Anchorage has also grown, but the rate of growth on an average annual basis has been higher in the borough. Next slide. Employment also has higher average annual growth, but still much lower levels in the borough, about 21,000 jobs, again, reported at place of work, versus 169,000 in the municipality. Okay, so that was the overall MSA, Metropolitan Statistical Area. And our job next was to allocate that population and that employment to the study area, which is really 873 traffic analysis zones, or TAZs. And they really make up 98% of the population and 99% of employment, really almost all of the area, but up near Willow is not included, and then like Girdwood is not included. They don't have traffic zones, so, but the vast majority of MSA is included. And so we were also not just looking at population and employment, but there were these various data points that had to be developed because, again, as Judy mentioned, we were working with the previous AMATS model, and these were the inputs that were necessary for the traffic modeling. So we got household, population, employment by all the 13 industry classifications, household income, per capita income, workers per household, and school enrollment. It ended up being about 530,000 data points that had to be generated for the whole study area because we had all those TAZs and all those different scenarios. So, but yeah, okay. No, go ahead.
All set?
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
And so once you have your control totals and your aggregate numbers, where do people live? Where do people work? What was cool about doing this work post the 2010 census was that we had pretty good information about where people live from the census. So we took the Department of Labor, quote, control totals for population and essentially allocated those out to the TAZs using the residential patterns that have been identified through the census. And particularly in the borough, that process did have some complications because the TAZ boundaries, which are here in the red, don't wholly align with the census geography, which is the areas in the white. So for example, like this olive-colored area was split between these two TAZs, but all of the development is really in this location. So we didn't want to just artificially allocate, say, half of the development up here when really it needed to mostly go here. And so what we did was use the borough's LiDAR data, which was converted to a building footprint layer. That would basically show that the majority of the buildings were here and kind of force the numbers of people to go into that particular TAZ. And that helped save time and money because we didn't have to go through and visually check with an aerial every single TAZ. But we did compare the totals at the community council level with other studies, and those that were 5% or more off, we did do that visual review to make sure we got it right, as close as we could. And then in the municipality, we didn't have that issue. The TAZs and the census geography do align a lot better, which is great. But where there were some issues, we used the address point layer to do essentially the same method. For the employment controls allocation process, it's a little bit different because there isn't really a census. I mean, there is a census of employment, but doesn't do the same thing. It doesn't allocate employees at their place of work at the block group level. And so we knew that AMATS had done a lot of work getting the employment allocation right for their previous work. So we really used that allocation, knowing that there haven't been tremendous changes in Anchorage in terms of where people work. They're still downtown and midtown and the hospital area. So that really was the basic premise under which we allocated out the employment. And then in the borough, there had been some more work done with the Parks Highway alternative process, so we did use that as a basis for allocation. And this is just, there's a lot more nuances to how I'm describing this, but that's all written up in the report. And then we did a survey of the employers at Point Mac, just to get that information as correct as we could, since there are about 8 or so different employers there now. So we put that into the model as well. Next slide. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Bill, and he's going to talk more about the forecast.
Thanks, Shanna. My name is Bill Reed with Cardno, based in Portland. Shannon and I actually, I'll talk about previous studies in just a moment, but I've worked with Shanna previously on Anchorage's, the Muni's commercial land study that was done a couple of years ago. And personally, I'm assisting the Muni with their industrial land study update. So between the two of us, we've gotten rather familiar with things here recently for Anchorage and the Matsu Borough. Very generally speaking, for the study, these are the critical time points for study and analysis. 2016, we assumed beginning year of bridge construction, with completion in 2019, which means that in the study and study results, 2020 is the first year where impacts of bridge development in the base case bridge development scenario. 2020 is the first year where results show potential impacts of bridge development. And then thereafter in the study, results are forecast out to 2040 in 5-year increments, and then in 10-year increments beyond that, 2050 and 2060 for all socioeconomic variables. So the process of coming up with the methodology for forecasting all the socioeconomic variables in the study area, we went through the process of reviewing economic trends that have occurred since 2010, 2011, when a lot of the previous work had been done, and before, for socioeconomic analysis of the bridge, just to take a look to see what has been happening in Anchorage, what's been happening statewide, and what do we know, what do we better know about the economy since the Great Recession. A lot of the previous studies that were done were either done before or during the early years of the Great Recession, and there was a lot of uncertainty and a lot of different types of assumptions about what the economy would do that maybe perhaps there was certainly good idea to go back and revisit, and now that we know a lot better about what's happened in Anchorage and the state. As Shannon described, the next thing we did was to talk to kind of major individuals and institutions that had a lot of valuable input specifically for circumstances leading up to and potentially after a bridge is constructed. The next thing we did, given the interviews, all the detailed interviews that we had completed, as well as taking a look at what did the economy do over the past several years, we basically reconducted a new kind of, I wouldn't say consensus, but we basically took a look at past economic forecasts and updated and created a new macroeconomic forecast for the Anchorage MSA with really kind of a starting point, the 2009 ICER study as a starting point, given that it's really the most sophisticated and detailed forecast that's been done leading up until this point. But we modified and kind of edited growth rates for different industries and such based on what we now know after economic review of what's been going on. The next thing that we did, one of the things that differentiates this analysis from previous ones is that the municipality and the Matsu Borough have put in a lot of work over the last 3 years on different planning studies. Matsu Borough's done a lot of work on understanding what their build-out capacity is by TAC. They've also the recently released Future Study, 2060 Future Study, puts a lot of effort into where they think population can occur, given best known information right now about infrastructure and other issues. And certainly the municipality, since 2010, 2011, has put a lot of work into studying land use issues, commercial, industrial, and certainly residential with the residential market study a couple of years ago. All of those studies and their findings were directly utilized for this analysis. and weren't previously available. And here are a number of the different studies that we reviewed to take a look at what past growth rates were and how they were derived, and how we would, moving forward, what we thought needed to be moderated or maybe, brought down a little bit given what we now know about the economy. So these are all starting with the Anchorage 2020 plan all the way up until the 2011 traffic and toll revenue study, the most recent one. All right. These are the new studies that have occurred since the previous analysis of the bridge, really. The main thing I want to emphasize really with this is, first off, the housing market analysis for the municipality, in our view, made a very persuasive case that there are some certainly affordability issues, but residential capacity issues, given how much growth will likely occur in the municipality. And that sets the stage certainly better for understanding what types of growth will continue to occur in the municipality and what potential growth will continue, if not accelerate, up towards the MATS Super O, just given availability, pricing, that sort of thing. The commercial land study that Shannon and I assisted the city with had similar findings. Commercial lands, capacity, the need for effort to increase capacity locally because there's going to be basically potential build out will not have enough land given what population growth will likely be in the region and certainly within the municipality. And right now with the industrial land study update that's still in progress, we've helped the municipality come back with a bit more of a moderate forecast of the economy, and certainly for industrial land using sectors. The previous study was before the Great Recession, or in early parts of it, and had much more uncertainty about where the economy was going to go. And we just know much more now. Okay, so there are two basic scenarios we're forecast in the report. We forecast a scenario without a bridge. How would the region likely grow if there is not a bridge? And then the main scenario that I'll be discussing here is the baseline bridge scenario. A bridge is built and the economy grows kind of at a baseline or medium growth scenario. There are two additional scenarios that are in the study and that kind of give a confidence interval to potential growth in the region with a bridge. But this is the baseline, the medium growth scenario. There's also a high and a low scenario to be considered. The other thing that wasn't available in previous analyses of the bridge is in the past 3 or 4 years there have been a number of studies nationwide, good studies really, about the long-term permanent impacts of major transportation infrastructure across the country, different individual projects as well as kind of different large academic studies of, once the initial boom of construction is gone, what type of long-term permanent growth actually remains. And what we found is that the results are varied greatly, but for a region that's economically isolated like Anchorage and the Matsu Borough, you don't have a lot of bordering states and bordering metropolitan areas where a major infrastructure project here would possibly bring new investment from those other regions. The isolation here basically results in what we found to be bumps up to growth potentially with the bridge, but not dramatically in any way. So, first off, historically speaking, for population, household, employment growth, we have a historical summary, 1990 to 2000 and 2000 to 2010. And then the three major forecast periods for no bridge and with the bridge for each of the variables, population, household growth, and employment growth. First off, for both scenarios, we're forecasting gradual decreases in the overall rate of growth of the different variables. And that part of that is just more kind of a conservative approach to where the economy is going, as well as when anything gets bigger, its growth rate declines. So there's a little bit of that effect as well. But as you can see, moving forward, for instance, annual population growth, 2015 to 2035, we're estimating at 1.42% without a bridge in the MSA study area. But with the bridge, really only a modest increase of 1.45%. And for each of the variables, we expect modest bumps up, not dramatic increases because of a bridge, but modest increases. And that's a result of, in part, talking to a number of the informants and different representatives. The bridge will likely create efficiencies for different sectors. Some big efficiencies and the ability to expand significantly, but for a lot of different sectors and a lot of different types of urbanization, the bridge doesn't create a dramatically different situation. It creates some efficiencies for, broadly speaking. Shannon, you can go ahead. Okay, so these are the detailed results. For population, Anchorage, Matsuboro, and MSA-wide. With the bridge, what we expect to see, or what we forecast to see, is without the bridge being built through 2040, Anchorage is expected to grow to nearly 366,000 population. With the bridge, we estimate that it grows to about 357,000 in population, for a net difference of almost 9,000 lower population by 2040 in Anchorage with a bridge than without. And the main reason being is that, and we'll talk about the Matsuboro in a moment, the main reason being that with a bridge opening up, all of a sudden households that were having to make a 45-minute, 50-minute commute residential choice based on price now have the option of making a residential commute to work back and forth either way, 20, 25 minutes. And that's going to open up basically to a number of different households that option, and we estimate that a number of them are going to take that option. But the number isn't going to be dramatic. We don't estimate large net changes, large net differences. The main thing with the bridge is that Anchorage is going to continue to grow, but as an option, as a residential location option, Anchorage won't go quite as fast as it would have with the bridge. The Matsuboro, on the other hand, has the exact opposite effect. With the bridge, certainly, Point McKenzie on the other side of the bridge is in the Matsuboro, so everything that moves across, population households that move across, there's going to be an acceleration in their growth. And by 2040, we're anticipating that without a bridge, just under 197,000 population in the Matsuboro for the study area. With a bridge, nearly 208,000 population, for a net difference of about 11,000 more people with a bridge than without. MSA-wide, no dramatic net changes is what we would anticipate. And there's modest net new growth that's created by the bridge and the different economic efficiencies that occur for different industries and sectors. But by and large, it's much more of a kind of open up kind of different locational options and business operation options for different industries. And on the employment side, the effect is actually dampened even. With a bridge, we expect or forecast that by 2035, 2040, total employment in Anchorage is around 202,000. By 2040, without the bridge, roughly 204,000, 203,677, for a net difference of 1,500 jobs fewer in Anchorage than with a bridge than without. And as we visited with different interests when we talked to them, the weight of what they said and the weight of the study information that we reviewed was that there will be instances, construction, some warehouse and distribution, Port of Anchorage anticipates seeing new business opportunity with having industrial land nearby across the bridge. But by and large, the weight of the evidence is that there's no major change to industry sector employment and locational choices moving forward. But it does open up for some. Matsuboro, again, the opposite. With the bridge, for all years, basically, employment is expected to grow for both scenarios. Like in Anchorage, growth occurs under both. But with the bridge, 59,500 jobs, 57,300 without the bridge, for a net differences of just over 2,000. But overall, no major dramatic increases in employment region-wide because of a bridge, but more options opened up, efficiencies created for some sectors, and different locational choices and the economics of those choices for different sectors. Thanks, Sean. So AgriVet created a series of maps for population, households, and employment. This is for population for the base year Here's the Point McKenzie study area, basically, where the bridge would be built right across here. Absolutely, a lot of the population density in the municipality of Anchorage, some in Eagle River, and then up in the Matsu core, Wasilla and Palmer. Certainly different density levels that are in different parts of the cities. By 2030, with the bridge being built, again, the same information, people per acre by TAZ, darker colors representing higher density per acre, people per acre, and lighter colors representing lower people per acre, lower density. With the bridge, honestly, no dramatic changes in the future densities. I mean, as a matter of fact, the analysis that we did directly took into account the most recent AMATS TSP and how it allocated population and growth in the Anchorage Bowl. We don't anticipate major significant changes with a bridge to how Anchorage will likely densify over time. With the bridge by 2030, we also see the core continuing to increase in density. By 2060, we do see a lot of overall population and density change, certainly in Point McKenzie. After 45 years, we do see some areas based on the allocation process showing higher density and higher growth because of that 20-25 minute commutability rather than the 45-50 and longer. But again, Anchorage continues to see higher and higher density as it continues to pursue policies for redevelopment, intensification of different land uses. And again, we also see the same sort of pattern up in the core. They'll continue to densify. By 2060, absolutely. Growth will continue here, but not nearly at the same extent. And again, a very little difference we anticipate seeing in the Anchorage Bowl regarding how population moves around. Rachel?
Yeah, I can do some of these. We also just did a quick little analysis to try to break down a little bit more what happens in the borough, because there are these discrete communities. So you have Greater Wasilla, Big Lake Houston, Greater Palmer, the Willow area, Point Mac. And so if you go to the next slide, Bill. So basically, this is the current base year population. Here's your 294,000 people in Anchorage. Total MSA 384,000. Anchorage is about 77%. And here's how that population breaks out in these communities. So Greater Wasilla has about 15% of the population, or 57,000 people. When you go to 2030, which means the next slide, you see the build here and the no build. Not too much of a difference in terms of the percent distribution for Anchorage, slightly less over here with a build, but you can see how Wasilla also loses, their growth is not quite as fast under the build scenario, because within the borough people are choosing Point Mac, maybe less so than they might choose Greater Wasilla and Greater Palmer. And you see that again even more dramatically in 2060. Here you've got about 78,000 person small city in Point McKenzie. Now that Point Mac area has 12% of the population, whereas right now I think it has less than 1%. And you can see how Wasilla has fewer people than under the no build scenario, and similar Palmer has fewer people than under the no build. So in some ways, the more substantial impact of the crossing is the allocation of residential choices within the borough, because now you have a location that's closer to the urban core that you can live at, which is Point McKenzie. And just maybe to make it simple, I'll just go through these, but jump in, Bill. This is the same maps that you saw before, only the jobs per acre. So again, you can see high density of employment here in the Muni, the core area of the borough, very little in Point Mac. 2030 starts to see an increase in employment density here, and then 2060 even more so, which is the next slide. Yep. And then we went through the same exercise of kind of showing the borough distribution as well as Anchorage. Again, right now 11% of the jobs are in the borough. You move to 2030, you start to see that the borough is going to secure about 18% in their growth scenarios, but slightly less in Wasilla, and in Palmer as Point Mackenzie grows out as a job base as well. And again, much more dramatic when you have about 13,000 employees at 2060. There's less growth under the build scenario in Wasilla and Palmer. So anyway, we thought that was interesting because it's often framed about what happens in Anchorage relative to the borough, but you do actually see some significant changes within the borough itself. So we have some extra slides, but we won't go through those. So maybe now we want to turn over to Hugh. Let me
Mind going?
Yeah, here's this.
Good afternoon. My name is Hugh Miller. I'm with CDM Smith. In the toll industry, we're what's called traffic engineers. It's a special, very specialized function that my firm does. We produce traffic and revenue forecasts for toll roads. This function. And we do a lot of them, so we're pleased to be here today. What I was going to do is I'm going to tell you about the method we use to come up with the traffic and revenue forecasts, and then I'm going to show you some of the results so you can see what they look like. Presentation outline is I'm going to talk about the method quickly. I know there's technical people in the room, so I'm going to say some technical things, but not many. I'm not all that technical either, by the way. And I don't mind if I say something and you have a question. If Rob doesn't mind, you can stop me and ask a question. That'd be.
I mind. Keep talking.
All right, keep going. Want to get this over with fast, right? Yeah, okay. I want to talk about the travel demand modeling work we did. And I'm going to spend most time talking about the traffic forecast. If the traffic forecasts are reasonable and make sense, then the traffic and revenue results are good, which will be toward the end. We also have some sensitivity tests that we did that are actually expected by rating analysts and by TIFIA. So part of the work we're doing is aimed at that audience. It's a kind of an art that they expect certain things, and we're getting there. And then last, figure there'll be some questions about what the comparison, the current forecast with the prior one. So, okay. All right, so what we did was we created a special purpose, actually a single purpose travel demand model that we're calling it the KAC2 model. Okay, and we basically started with AMATS 2011 travel demand model that was your property, and we also used some information from the Parks Highway Alternative Corridor model. Basically, Shanna talked about some zone system changes that we got from there. The models having the KAC2 model, this special purpose model, only for producing traffic and revenue estimates for the bridge. That's the only purpose it's going to be used for. But the structure of that model is identical to the AMATS model. The data is the same. The model components are the same. The only exception is that we've added a toll diversion model, which was required in order to complete our work. We updated the model. The 2011 model had, as you know, a validation year of 2007. So what we did was we collected data for 2012, and we brought the whole model structure forward to 2012. Okay, so as part of that, we collected some special purpose data that the rating analysts will expect to see. And I can type about those in a minute. And we use that as part of validation. So we validated this new model to 2012 conditions. And then we used that model to forecast traffic and revenue, traffic for the bridge. Also slightly different, we used the socioeconomic data forecast from the independent economists, right? We didn't use AMATS forecast, we used their forecast. We used transportation improvements adopted by AMATS and approved by the borough, right? So we have the same road network, future road network, or future improvements that you guys do, at least we intended to. And we use the toll policies from the department, okay? And with that, we developed forecasts. These forecasts we then use to, there are some other assumptions which I'll review. that are used to come up with estimates of annual transactions. These are the number of times people cross and pay toll on the bridge. And from that, we developed toll revenue estimates. And we also performed a variety of sensitivity tests and a formalized risk analysis. These are things that rating analysts expect before we're done. Okay, this should be very familiar. This is your model. Slight changes in the borough, but it is your model. With that red line in there is the KAC project. That's a base year network. It is again, it's a 2012 network. It's slightly different from a network you've had, but it is basically your road network, the way you use it and create it. Okay. Okay, so validation, I think everyone knows, or most people know, I'll say, these models are, what happens is, validation step is when you use a model to predict traffic on a historic time frame. Okay, so we use the model to predict traffic in 2012, and we compare it against 2012 counts. And then we would adjust the model to make it so that it's a better fit of the counts, right? They never quite perfectly match. I mean, I think AMATS had done a great job on the first one, and we're taking a lot of advantage of that because it turns out that if you just advance it 5 years, there's not much difference. So when you see it, if you get to look at our report, you'll see our validation statistics look a lot like yours. In effect, you can hardly tell the difference, so which is not a surprise. So anyways, we went through that. Again, we updated the data. We used the EGNUVEX 2012 data, SE data, and we used 2012 counts from the department. We went through that and finished the calibration. The other things that we did travel, rating analysts are concerned about the travel times on competing routes. So the competing route for one competing route, there's only one competing route for the bridge is the Glen Highway. So we did a lot of travel time and delay studies on at 2 different time periods on the Glen. We also did a Bluetooth survey, which is a travel pattern survey on the Glen, identifying how long a trip people make on the Glen. And that is something I'll show you in a minute what that looked like. But we actually we made adjustments to the model to replicate that Bluetooth survey information, which is something the rating analysts will want to hear. We did a status preference survey. Our research system group did that in the spring, and we used that to establish the value of time, how people, what they're willing to pay for a time savings. That's the value of time. And finally, we use some data that the department keeps, their inspection and permit data, to look at truck patterns, movements of patterns, travel patterns for trucks. And again, we have some, at the end of the day, we say this model validated to the same high level as the AMATS 2011 model did. They're very, very similar. Okay, so then we use that validated model to produce traffic forecasts. The forecasts were the forecasts that Bill talked about. We got those from independent economists, and they came for us. We had the model years we used. We developed model years 2020 in 5-year increments out to 2040. Okay, so we have networks, we have SE data, and we developed all of that in a consistent pattern. We did that for 2 cases, the no build, which is a case where the bridge is not constructed, and the build, where the bridge is constructed. Excuse me. We also, you'll see in a minute, we did forecasts for the build without a toll and the build with a toll. And when we start evaluating how the model worked, I'll explain that in a minute. In the future year networks, we used the improvement plan adopted by AMATS. We used all similarly in the borough, we used the network improvements that they adopted. The toll plan and other parameters come from the department, and the value of time from the RSG survey. Okay, Shannon? All right, so the results are not the same as you'd get from an AMATS model, but it turns out they're very, very similar. And if they were wildly different, we'd all be wondering what happened, whether they're higher or lower. They're very similar to some numbers we saw from that came out of on the side of the Parks Highway Alternative Corridors study. There were some numbers in there for a future year on the crossing without a toll, and they're very similar. Okay. So anyway, so now at this point, for this presentation, I want to evaluate the traffic forecast using a technique called screen line analysis, another one select length, and then toll sensitivity. These are the things actually we will present to rating analysts when we get to them. Okay, a screen line is screen lines are imaginary lines running through networks. And you can use these to basically assess whether the forecast makes sense. So in this case, there's one screen line that matters to the project. It runs down the Connect Arm and runs down the Connect River, right? This is anyone that comes from the Muni and goes to the borough, they're crossing that screen line. And you'll see in a minute, we're gonna look at the total traffic across that screen line, that single screen line. So I'm going to show this chart. This chart appears in our report. These just told me to go faster. These are two-way AETs for those of you with and we have something called ramp up, which you'll have to read our report about to figure that out. But anyways, they're basically the forecast from the model, and I want to show you what they are, explain them, and at the end of the day conclude they're reasonable. The first two rows are counts. So that's and this is the column has the Nick Arm Crossing, the Glen Highway, the old Glen Highway, and a total. So you add them up. Okay. So in excuse me, in 2012 there were 32,600 people trips back and forth between the Muni and the borough. That's it. I guess if they flew, they could get there and not be counted. But if they're on the ground, that was it, right? So and now, next slide. What I want to do first is look at the case. Now these are, I have highlighted the no build. Okay, I'm going to keep the same numbers, but I'm going to highlight different. There's too many numbers up here for me to do it anyway. Okay, so let's look at what happens in the no build case. The model shows that 32 going to the total across the screen line, going to 37 in 2015, 45 in 2020, 83,000 in 2040, which I think is similar to forecasts that I've seen from AMATS reports. It'd be interesting to hear, see what differences are. They shouldn't be wildly different. Okay. So that was the no build. Now we're looking at the case where we have the Nick Arm Crossing in the network. Okay. The model shows an increase in total screen line traffic, right? Because of the induced by the new project. Okay, you build a new road, a new bridge, you're expecting more traffic. It happens everywhere, all across the country. So we'll talk in a minute about what that is. But you see the 45 goes up to 50, the 83 goes up to 110. And you'll notice now we have build no toll in a case where there's build toll. When it's tolled, it's slightly lower. Okay, and you put a toll on a project, somebody's not going to use it. They're going to go another way. We're going to talk more about that in a minute. But okay, next slide. All right, I still got plenty of colors left. Don't worry if you worry about that. Okay. Let's look at this case here. What happens is the total goes up. Let's look at the toll case. The total goes from 45 to 50. The Nick Arm Crossing gets 7,600, but the Glen gets less. So there's a switch in traffic a little bit, just like she was talking about where the traffic moves. More people are using Nick Arm Crossing. Okay. Now, I have on the, you can see here the proportion of traffic. This is the proportion of traffic on the screen line at using the Nick Arm Crossing. It goes from 15 to 37 in the forecast history. And part of that is, it isn't that people are leaving the Glen. The Glen still has a lot of traffic. It's that all of a sudden there's a new community over there. And for them, this will be the way to get to Anchorage. Right? Once you're in that community, it's the only way to get to Anchorage, pretty much. Okay, next slide. We have something, there's a commonly used term is induced traffic. In fact, I talked about it. When you add a new toll facility, you expect to have more traffic. Induced, in this case, that induced percentage is the screen line total, the increase in the screen line total from the original case. So you can see it's 12 to 13% induced traffic in the opening, near the opening year. It goes up to 30% in the out year. Normally it's 10%, but in this case, there's another thing going on. The forecasts have the development in the Point Mac area, right? And that's why it's higher in the future. Why the model shows it being higher in the future. Talking about what the model says here. Okay, last. This is my last use of this pretty table. Retention is the case of when you go from a no toll to a toll, how much of the traffic is retained. Right. In most toll facilities, it might be 40%. There are some cases where toll roads have been opened and then tolled, open for a week, 2 weeks, and then tolled. There's only 40% of the traffic on the bridge or the roadway once it's been tolled. In this case, why it's different in this case is the alternative, the non-tolled alternative is, all the way around Nick Goose Bay Road and Parks and the Glen back to Anchorage. So if it's a trip that's going to make it, it's probably going to make it with a toll or without a toll. The difference is there's an area up near Wasilla where people can have a choice, a reasonable choice of using the Glen or using the Nick Arm Crossing. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. I hope you like that chart. That was, I always like that chart. Okay. The second method that we want to look at is this select link analysis. And this is a case where am I running out of time? I could talk forever about this. So, Rob, you'll have to pull a Bray up from under me. The select link analysis, we're going to look at a specific link, and we're going to show bandwidth is the width of traffic, and we're going to look for traffic arriving at or departing from that one particular link. Okay? So the widest band is that band, okay? And we're looking at how do people get there and where are they going to, right? So if this was traffic volume, this would be the widest by far, right? Is the Glen near coming into Anchorage, but it's not. That's the widest up there because we're doing this select link analysis. So we're going to look at select link on the Glen Highway at the screen line. And then we're also going to look at select link on the project. And we're going to see where do trips come from and go to. That is, where does the model say these are trips come from and go to. So this is now in 2020, no build. There's 42,100 trips from the model at that one particular link. And you can see most of them make it to Anchorage. There's some drop-offs at Eagle River, but most of them make it to Anchorage. And then they disperse up in the core area of the borough. Going to 2040, the line just gets bigger. This is 2040 no build. It's the same thing, more trips at the crossing, right? But the pattern's roughly the same. And by the way, this was what we did with the Bluetooth, was to establish that pattern. Actually, that was the purpose of it. Okay, next. And now we're going to look at two cases, which is the build toll, the traffic at the Nick River from that that screen line, from the screen line analysis too, is 40,000, slightly lower, but the pattern's the same. Go ahead. 2040, it's not 77,000, it's 63,000, but it's the same pattern. Most people that go through that length are headed to Anchorage. Okay, now last segment is, or last two, is what does a KAC Nick Arm crossing look like? In this case, you see it's 7,600, but you see where the trips go, they come up this far. There are no trips from Palmer or Wasilla, right? It's this lower part of the borough, okay, where they're coming from. And when you go to 2040, it's just the line got thicker, but you don't get more trips from up here. The additional volume is from development that is in the model at the lower borough here, the Point Mac area, okay? So when you see our forecast, you see the revenue, it's from development that is forecasted to occur here, right? The final, still looking at traffic, the final one is toll sensitivity. We use the models to see what happens with different toll rates. So we tried from $1 to $9, and it behaves the way you'd expect it to. As price goes up, traffic goes down. That's that top graph, right? As toll goes up, the revenue goes up, but at a decreasing rate. Okay, this is and from microeconomics, you can tell there'd be some point out there where there would be a revenue maximizing toll rate, after which the revenues would go down. You can have too high a toll where you don't make money, more money with higher tolls. It's the same thing with pricing other goods. So what the rating analysts are interested in this is that there's the forecasts indicate with you'll see in a minute, the project team's been thinking about a $5 toll each way. So that's right in the middle of that graph. So what the rating analysts would be interested in is that there's room for a productive toll increase if something went wrong. Okay. It's always a question for them. So we have that ready. And there's similar results. We actually did this for each model year. There's similar results for 2040. Okay, I'm almost at the end. The toll parameters, the toll plan, we'll call it. The plan is that all tolls will be collected electronically, that you would have a transponder with or without an account. And the other way would be a video bill. There'd be a way to capture your license plate and send you a bill. The toll for passenger cars, vans, pickup trucks with 1 and 2 axle vehicles would be $5. By the way, these are the assumptions that are used in this report. Okay, $5 each way. Commercial vehicles would pay more. And also the toll is indexed to the higher of 2.5% or inflation. So each year the toll would go up. Okay, you don't pay on the roadside. You pay either through your credit card or through a bill. That's the assumption. 2 assumptions about trucks. We assume that the commercial vehicles, which are not the passenger cars, but the other vehicles, we assume the average was 3.6 axles per vehicle. We said there would be 8% of them in 2020 and 10% in 2040. These were the value of time we've got from the survey. We assumed the vehicle operating cost of 25 cents per mile. These are an annualization is an idea how many of not weekdays aren't this weekend days are not the same as weekdays for toll facilities, so we're using some lower number. And then we have a thing called ramp up, which is a reduction in the early years. So okay, so here are the forecasts. There's more details in the report, which you should be able to see online. In the opening year, we're saying there would be on an average day 3,500 vehicles back and forth, 1,750 each way. And over time that would grow. Some other numbers you might be familiar with, 33,700 in 2035, which is something like some forecasts that you've produced for the bridge. These, of course, are withhold. And then using those other assumptions, they get translated into transactions, and the transactions get translated into revenues. Okay. All right, so one other thing the rating analysts expect is a lot of sensitivity tests. Their skeptics want to know what could go wrong with forecasts like this. So we try to have a centrist, if anything, a centrist to low forecast, but we look at high and low scenarios on key variables. So one of them, then I've ranked them in the order in which they matter. The SE data forecasts, socioeconomic data forecasts are the prime driver of the answer, which should be apparent at this point. And the revenues on the low scenario that we got from Agnew-Beck goes from 20% below to 5 to 20% higher on the high side. The number of revenue days is another key variable that can affect it. The truck percentages, if you add these together, probably comes in third. A fourth important is network improvements. The low side one is what would happen if you widened the Glen. So this is something we just did. We added an extra lane in each direction from the beginning of the forecast period throughout, and you can see that had a relatively minor negative effect. We looked also at extending the KAC project up to the Parks Highway up near Willow, and that had a positive effect in the early years. Okay. And then here's a summary of what our comparison between these final estimates and the prior forecast. Two things, traffic or transactions on the top and total revenue on the bottom. The estimates the current estimates are lower for a lot of different reasons. The estimates at the bottom, the total revenues lagged about 5 years. If you look at them, they're parallel, and it's about 5 years difference between them. We have a new updated model. We have totally different socioeconomic forecasts. We have reduced truck percentages from before, and we have a lower axle count than before. There's a 3-year delay in the opening of the 5 years. That's 3 of them. And then also in the beginning, we have a deeper and longer ramp-up period. It starts lower and rises quicker. Okay, I thank you for listening.
Thanks.
Judy?
That concludes our presentation. I guess we'll just take questions.
Stay in line.
Yeah, I'll move over here in case
Okay.
in case I can answer any questions, which is probably unlikely.
Nice. So, just show of hands, how many people in the public would like to make comments today at some point? Anybody? Really? Nobody?
One person on the phone.
One person on the phone. Great, you're gonna have a lot of time.
Can you change our mind later?
Yeah, you can. I'm just trying to make sure that everybody gets a chance to speak, so I don't want to jam it up at the end so that people at the end get caught without time as well. So I'm just trying to get a rough idea. How many policy and TAC members have comments they'd like to make at this time or discussion they'd like to have?
Question.
2, 3, 4. Okay, so Craig, why don't we start with, let's go with 3 minutes. And we'll, if it looks like people are catching fire and starting to accelerate, and we'll reassess, but it looks like we've got time for each person. So let me just start at the end, and I'm sorry, ma'am, I don't know your name. Do you have any comments or questions you'd like to ask of these people at this point? Sherry? No? Lance, I know you've got something.
I got a couple.
Okay, fire
Well, let
away.
me just start. I have to tell you, Judy, that's in my opinion, the best presentation of the information on data, traffic, and tolls you guys have offered to AMATS. I mean, it was simple and it was clean, even with the cool colors. So, my compliments to the team.
Thank you.
And it was very methodical from the beginning to the end. A couple questions that I have, and not in any particular order, but what is the state's policy on tolls?
Well, we made some assumptions on what the tolling structure would look like.
Okay.
All electronic tolling, rather
Okay.
than stopping in a gantry, those types of things, how we would do enforcement, how we would provision tolling.
Okay, so it was more of a method in which the toll would be applied when it's put in place?
So they aren't adopted policies, these are their assumptions, and it's sort of what we need to do in the interim before the project opens,
Okay.
to make sure that we've got all the regulations in place that we need to.
Well, maybe in the presentation in the future, you might want to just call it tolling methods.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I had a totally different thought process in mind on
Policies is-
the payment structure and all of that, so
Okay.
just a suggestion. And then, well, I got a lot of questions, but I'll just go with my next one, which is, maybe this one's for, I don't know who this is for, but the land use assumptions that you made in Point Mac in 2020, the development assumptions, I understand the TAZ structure, but where did the development assumptions come from?
I can answer that, Bill Reed. In order to do the forecast through 2060, basically what we did was we kind of assumed that development over time would pursue kind of what highest and best use of land would be in the different TAZs. It started off with touring the area and taking a look at, what the land looked like, and then going through the process of methodically allocating future growth in the region would, the majority of it, from 60 to 90%, prefer to be near existing or likely future urbanization. So growth is going to occur where growth already is growing. And then the rest of it was based on, it's in the report in greater detail, but we came up with an allocation methodology that took into account for different sectors, what type of transportation corridor exists or would likely exist in the future for freight moving, that sort of thing.
Bill, you just assumed the existing land use assumptions that the borough is using with no changes in policy on changes of land use. You're just using what the borough has currently?
No, we used their their residential build-out analysis by TAZ.
Okay.
But their build-out analysis assumes, makes a lot of assumptions about existing zoning movement. But over time,
Okay.
with the 20-25-minute commute away from Anchorage or back and forth, we assumed that land values would change over time, different development pressures would occur in different TAZs, that sort of thing. So again, it was more kind of an economic highest and best use, what would likely want to be there given existing and future infrastructure, and then, residential land being where it could be developed feasibly, likely, natural amenity, all those sorts of things.
Thanks, Rob.
That's it?
Yeah, for now.
Thank you. Jennifer, any questions?
No, not this time.
Mr. Ludwig?
This time, it's a good presentation.
Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was just wondering, I was looking at the presentation by Hugh Miller, and I was wondering how would your projections change looking at a lower cost of fuel? It appears that we're getting into a lower cost of oil period here. So if the price of gas is reduced, is the number of people driving in going to stay higher longer?
We did in those sensitivity tests. We had it's an important variable in our analysis, and we did some sensitivity tests for it. 25% lower, 25% higher. I mean, significant changes in the cost to operate vehicles, but it didn't make much difference because of the geography of the place. The traffic, most of the traffic you saw when I had that select link analysis. Most of the traffic, particularly in the long-term future, comes from that Point McKenzie area. So the cost of if you're looking to get to the airport, the alternative of going all the way around is dwarfed by the operating costs, the time to go around by all of that. It's small. The change in fuel prices is small. So we didn't see a significant change in the forecast because of that. And it's a little bit unusual and requires some explanation for rating analysts. It has to do with the geography of the Point Mac area and the fact that there's the Connect Arm is there.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Mr.
I'm
Stevens?
fine, thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, thank you. Couple things. The study, it seemed, at least as far as I understood, was based on 2012 economic data. And clearly, we've entered a new realm here in the last 6 months of an economy that is looking at billions of dollars in shortfall. That'll have an effect on population, traffic, economies, and depending how long it lasts, possibly a very significant impact. Is there a plan to update the study based on, the current economy? Because clearly 2012 numbers are radically different in terms of economic analysis than what we're looking at today.
I can get that, Mr. Mayor. In the analysis in the report in detail, although I didn't discuss it in great detail here, we forecast a low growth scenario with bridge and without, that generally, roughly speaking, assumes about a 20 to 25% slower growth in the region for whatever unpredictable economic circumstance. And a lot of the analysis that you described also includes that for sensitivity analysis. So we're confident that we've bracketed fairly significant changes to where the economy could go. But the baseline and the base case scenario that I described in detail, significant reductions in growth would be somewhere between the low forecast that we did and the base case that I described in greater detail.
I guess my concern is, everyone who was here in the mid-'80s, we saw Alaska lose a third of its population. And if we're looking at any sort of a scenario like that, that's not anticipated. You're still anticipating a growth scenario, albeit a modest growth. But I think you're going to hear from legislators that will want to look at a worst-case scenario. Anyway, just my humble opinion on that. And then in your projections in terms of what's happening on the Mat-Su side, I know Mayor DeVillibus of the Mat-Su Borough had laid out a couple new town site possibilities to accommodate the growth that will be happening over there. Was that factored in at all? Their town site planning into your studies?
Mr. Mayor, it was. The 2060s Future Study, which very specifically lays out where the Mat-Su Borough's thinking for town sites were directly implemented into this, and those areas were, from a population and future economic growth standpoint, those TAZs within those town site areas were allocated stronger future growth. So their findings were directly implemented, yes.
Good, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Howe?
Thank you.
Ms. Walsh?
No questions.
Mr. Morton?
No, thank you.
Mr. Weaver?
I just want to comment, the team that you have put together, it's done exemplary work here, and Bill, especially what your historical knowledge on studies that you've worked on here for us. I have a similar question, perhaps, that Lance and the Mayor had. With the South Point McKenzie area, presently it's primarily industrial, ag, environmental sensitive. So those town center concepts, were they a little bit north, just south of Big Lake? Because that area on the very southern tip, and I was really looking at the 20 to 35 minute commute that you alluded to earlier.
Yes, no, very specifically, the Point McKenzie town site that they've laid out in their current planning effort is the one kind of halfway up in the study area. There's actually a second and somewhat larger town site concept planning area that they're working on at the very north west corner of the Point McKenzie area. So we directly kind of utilized where they expect population to grow in the forecast. But it's also fair to say that moving forward, having the bridge there and the ability to commute, what we're seeing is that they will likely see more development pressure and popularity of the Point Mac town site than perhaps the one to the north because of proximity.
Thank you.
Sure. Any further questions? Mr. Morris?
I also wanted to compliment the presenters. That was extremely clear. I really appreciate that. It's terrific. Did have a question. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the 2035, 2040 TAZ allocation and how it might have compared with the previous version of this. Were there any major differences in employment or population by TAZ between this effort and the previous effort?
Yes, there are some key differences. Number one, the most recent previous study, overall, generally speaking, by TAZ in the Point McKenzie area, the previous study found that Point McKenzie area would be far more of an employment center with some residential growth that would accompany that. Our analysis, based on a number of the different studies on both sides in the borough and in Anchorage that have been done since, indicating significant lack of capacity for different types of development, urbanization on the Anchorage side, and therefore continued pressure or at least trend for economic expansion to move north for various reasons. What we found was that on the other side of a bridge, there'll be far more pressure for residential development within that 20-25 minute. I mean, right now, the number of households in the area that can't make the 45-minute commute for whatever family, whatever reason, 40 to 50 minutes. But moving forward, given pricing and land availability here, very well documented in the housing market analysis, the really early pressure on for growth on the other side will be found to be residential. Certainly employment and other urbanization, but certainly more residential than the previous, and not quite as much employment pressure like the previous study.
That's it, Steve?
Yeah.
Thank you. Is Mr. Flynn on the phone?
I am, Mr. Campbell. Thank you.
Would you have a comment or question for the team?
Just that I appreciate listening in. I think I'm sorry I couldn't be there. I took ill this morning. It sounds like the projections are perhaps more realistic than we've heard in the past. I look forward to reading through the report when I get a copy.
So I take that's no further comments at this time?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think that concludes our committee discussions. I know there's at least one on the phone who had said he wanted to make a public comment. Sir, can you state your name and you have your 2 minutes of fame?
I guess.
I thought I heard somebody say they wanted to talk. Okay. So is there anybody now? Yes, sir. Can you stand, or you don't have to stand up, just state your name and fire away.
My name is Don Carney. I'm the current chair of the Matsurboro Transportation Advisory Board, but I am also the capital projects coordinator for the Matsurboro School District. And I wanted to compliment the team on this report. The thing I think that was important that came in this report that I did not see in previous reports is that the bridge itself is going to drive use by creating that population on the other side of the bridge that's going to work in Anchorage that ordinarily would just stay in Anchorage. That bridge gives access to inexpensive, easily developable land, but it's going to take some time to do that. And that was built in to the forecast. They didn't say that in 5 years that it was going to be 6,000 more people, because it's going to take some time to get that development approved and built out and the infrastructure put in for it. And I really appreciate the thoroughness that's been put into this that clearly shows that growth is there. That bridge is going to create that growth, that population, housing population, but not in that first 5 or 6 years. It's going to be 10 to 20 years out there. And we are currently abiding or working along the same thought process, because we're in our 10-year and 20-year planning process for school development. And that is the picture that you put up here of the projected growth is exactly the picture that we are looking at in our projections for school needs in that area. So I really appreciate the new study.
Thank you. Anyone else from the crowd back there care to make a statement? Yes, sir?
Yeah, my name is Steve Cleary. I live here in Anchorage and I work for a group called Alaska Trails. I haven't been paying attention to the bridge very much for for a while, but I'm in general concerned about the financial costs of it. But I just want to make sure that I understood one of the slides up there correct, where it was comparing the no bridge versus bridge, and I looked at population, household, and employment. All the differences were 0.01% in the differences between whether or not we build the bridge or not. And so, of course, you can tell which way I'm leaning on this, but it seems like we would spend $800 million or more dollars to change things, these three key things, just 0.01% in either direction, and it seemed to vary bridge or no bridge either way. Am I, Bill, I think that was your, forgive me if I'm incorrect, I think that was your slide, or maybe Shanna's, but could you tell me if I'm interpreting that incorrectly, please?
No, the slide you're referring to does show very small changes in different growth rates directly as a result of the bridge. And the conclusion there, of course, was that we didn't find that the bridge made very dramatic changes to the economy and how fast it would grow in the region. It's more a matter of some addition, a bit more growth, but by and large, the impact really has to do with where businesses or households would make their locational choices. So yes, the different growth rates were minimal, were smaller. That's correct.
Thank you. Anything further? So Judy, do you have a wrap? John, did you want to say something?
I just want to, one question, I guess. I actually have many of them, but I'll just stick to one. In previous studies, we got information about the revenue stream versus the cost, and whether or not the revenue stream could pay for the bonds as well as the maintenance of the bridge itself. And I didn't see, I mean, it looked like a lot of money, obviously, and over time, I didn't see any comparison about the financial feasibility of the toll revenues in terms of ability to pay the bonds and the maintenance.
Well, that was going to be the wrap up. That's our next step. You know, this information now will be placed into the financial model, and you know, we've taken a really broad overlook at it. It looks like revenue will satisfy the TIFIA loan, but the financial advisor will get much more granular on how that financial model will function given this data input. When we aren't there yet, that's our next step.
Yes, sir.
Yes, my name is Bob French. I had about 8 or so questions. My guess is you probably can't go through those.
I think, what do we got? 3 minutes per person? Is that what we're doing here? You got 3 minutes, sir.
One of my questions really was, what was the percentage of the traffic that was assumed to go, say, north, what we would think of as a normal, the Matsu Borough coming into Anchorage versus Anchorage going out to the Matsu on the daily traffic? And then I guess one of my other questions was how much well and septic growth was assumed versus how much city water and sewer, such as on a town site?
I can answer the first one. Normally traffic goes, whatever goes out comes back. Otherwise, you'd have cars piling up someplace. But it's 50-50, I think, unless I'm misunderstanding.
No, I'm actually asking, say in the morning, how much of Anchorage traffic were you assuming was going out to a job out in the valley?
In the Point Mac area or up in the borough, the core area they call
I know in the previous study there were CDM Smith had like 13,000 jobs right on in the Port Mac TAS zone, and which means that there would also be a lot of jobs going from Anchorage, or people going from Anchorage out to the valley, and I wanted to see how much of that was assumed in this model.
I can't answer that I don't have those. I'm not sure I understand your question for sure, but also I don't have those particulars with me. So maybe that's something we could follow up on.
We could generate those numbers, Bob.
And the question on the
the well and septic versus the city water?
The analysis, we didn't make any forecasting or any assumptions very specifically about what type of systems, but what we did do was when we allocated where future growth would occur, how much and where it would go in Point Mac, we basically heavily allocated the growth going to where the borough is trying to plan in town sites, where that utilities infrastructure will be. There will be some growth and development that will likely occur not there. I mean, some of the bluffs with the views, over the arm and into Anchorage, there's going to be residential development over time that they're not necessarily planning as part of the town site, but that there will be that market demand for it. But by and large, we allocated significantly growth to occur where the borough is trying to plan infrastructure in the town sites.
Thank you.
Just one quick other one.
Okay.
CDM Smith in the past has had about a two times estimating more than double the amount of traffic that has actually showed up. Has CDM Smith's, what kind of a accuracy rate do you have for about the last 5 years?
That's not true. I don't know where you heard that, but our forecast record is very good. For most of our clients, I would say on new projects like this, we have some that are high, we have some that are low. It depends. There's a lot to these forecasts. We do our best to keep them reliable and useful, but that's not true. Our forecasts are not twice the high as what actually turns out. That's just not.
Okay, well, it was shown to be
Thank you.
118%.
Any further? Yes, ma'am.
I've got two. On the phone. Oh, and I've got two quick questions. First question is, and my name is Stephanie Kessler. First question is, so your 2040 numbers for population numbers for the Matsu Borough, I think we're like 208,000 in that area. Since I don't have the table in front of me, I can't say. But in 2014, Alaska Department of Labor population estimates for the Matsu Borough are 165,000. So I'm wondering where that 20% increase has come from. If you're aware of that difference, do you have an explanation for that difference?
You said 165?
Yeah. $166, yeah, in that general area.
We would have to check that because that's very inconsistent with the same data sources that AgriBec utilized for constructing the 2012 base year.
Right, it's right. Those numbers of the Department of Labor ICER numbers. Those are the ballpark area, the ballpark population figures that have been in play for the last several years. So there are multiple sources with numbers in that range. And so our question is why are your numbers so much higher and what the explanation for the difference is?
Okay, so I'm sorry. So by the 165 number, the 165,000, the population number that you're referring to is exactly what?
It's from the Alaska Department of Labor estimate.
But what was the number?
Oh, 166,000, and the year was 2042.
Oh, 2042, 160,000.
66.
166.
Right. Yeah, and that's all of Matsu Borough.
Well, what I would say is we went through the process of taking a look at recent and past forecasts, and none of the estimates of forecasts came in that low compared to where our numbers are.
Right.
So we went through and took a look at all recent and past forecasts, came up with growth rates or annual levels of growth that were reasonably consistent with the 2009 ICER study and what other published data sources are. So I'm surprised that the number you're quoting is that different given everything we did.
And actually, what this goes to my second question is we'd like to have the opportunity to review the report closely and then have an opportunity to have a Q&A. submitting questions via comment and then getting a response back a month later doesn't lead to a good dialogue or can be unsatisfactory. So I guess I was wondering what the next steps were and if it would be possible to have a Q&A or I can submit questions in advance and then come to a meeting with that or something like that.
Well, if you want to go through the report and put together a list of questions, we would be happy to sit down with you.
Sure, okay. That would be great. Thank you very much.
Okay, sir on the phone?
Yeah, just following up on that. The statement of work in the RFP said that the Cardinal and Agno-Beck would coordinate with ICER, the Matsu Borough, Anchorage, and the Department of Labor. So, and their number for 2037 was 155. Stephanie said was 166 for 2042. So your 2008 number is over 20% higher. So did you talk to the state demographer about the different assumptions? Because that appears to be something that should have been done as part of your statement, as part of your work statements. And then I have a follow-up question.
Sir, could you state your name, please?
My name is Jamie Kenworthy.
Oh, okay.
And the question is, did you compare your land use assumptions and other assumptions with the state demographer since your number is 20% population higher for Matsu in 2040?
Well, to answer the first question, yeah, I mean, we during the process, we met with Scott Goldsmith, and we reached out to different departments of the state to take a look at where previous estimates were historically and where forecasted numbers had gone out. One thing to keep in mind, and I would welcome assisting with figuring out where numbers are differing. But the thing to keep in mind is that there are a number of different scenarios for a number of these different studies. And so I don't know if you're talking about a low base year high from previous analyses of previous forecasts and if that's being compared to apples. But what I can say is that we did reach out to each of those different entities. They did coordinate with us, provided their input and information, and whatever studies that we could get from them, we utilized and reviewed in detail. And one of the chapters in the report goes on and on, table after table, of what all of the previous forecasts have been for population, employment, and households for the Matsu Borough, Anchorage, and the MSA since 2001. I mean, every single study, whether it was a Kinnick Arms Crossing specific project or study, or it wasn't. So I'm just surprised by the numbers that are being stated here, but certainly we welcome coordinating to answer any questions about that.
I'd like to add.
Well, the July Trends issue of the ADOL publication, it was a base forecast, so you may have consulted with them early, but I think it would be helpful for the Muni to understand the different assumptions between your higher number and the existing state projection. And my last question is, there was an initial report that Cardinal and Agno-Beck did for Cabada or DOT, and you were paid approximately $91,000. At that time, what was your 2040 population number in that initial report for which you were paid? And was it lower or higher than the number?
Your call cannot accept calls at this time. We're sorry for any inconvenience this may cause.
I guess the answer to that is, off the top of my head, I wouldn't know. As was expressed earlier, the study's scope and what was required of it changed over time. And there were different scenarios, many different scenarios modeled. So the version at whatever time point, I couldn't tell you right now. There were differences based on different hypothetical allocations of where growth might occur. But the one thing that hasn't changed really at all in the different steps of the analysis was overall that the Anchorage MSA economy was not expected to grow as fast, with or without a bridge, as fast as previous studies had indicated. And we attempted to come up with growth rates for different sectors of population that reflected more moderate growth expectations. But apples to apples, and with the numbers directly in front of me for studies for different versions of iterations at different times, I don't have in front of me to answer that question specifically.
Thank you. Any further flashes of concern from the crowd? Judy, do you have a closing statement you'd like to make?
I do, I'm hearing, and I appreciate this too, I'm hearing concern that we need to be conservative. These are changing times and there's a lot of unknown uncertainty in the future. Something to take away from this is that this study really doesn't do anything on its own. It's not influencing anything other than this project. And when the study is presented to the TIPIA, JPO, Joint Program Office, and to the rating agencies, they're going to give it its own haircut too. There are several layers of conservatism that have been, applied here. So, bear that in mind, as we go forward. That it's we're asking for a lot of money, and it's going to be scrutinized very closely.
So when will the information be made public, and how can people then comment on it and or meet with you? What's in line for that?
Well, we'll put these presentations on our website, kindergartenbridge.com. The studies should be there now. We're having those uploaded. Folks are welcome to send their comments in to our website or to our email address, or to give us a call or come by the office or whatever.
Okay.
Happy to take
Sounds
the
like you've got
comments.
some people that are interested in doing that.
We have a few, yeah.
Okay. All right. With that, I think, when is our next action here as a TAC or a policy committee? Craig, do you have that in front of you?
You have a meeting on the 18th. We have a meeting of the AMATS committees, along with some folks from Matsuburo on the 17th. So that's it.
All right. Thank you all for your attendance and your decency during the meeting. We're adjourned.
It was a decent meeting.